thinking that all paths lead to God. That's not the position here, and it's not the position of Yeshua. In fact, Yeshua states later in verse 24, so everyone who hears these words of mine and acts on them will be like a sensible person. True followers of those who orient their lives around Yeshua, the living Torah, and follow in his ways are the ones who find that much narrower path. And this idea of two paths is even reflected on in other Jewish texts. Other early Jewish texts talk about this idea of there being two roads, and that the righteous one is more difficult to find than the broad one. And this whole concluding section is interrelated. It is all concluding instructions that Yeshua's sermon wants to convey to those who are wise disciples. And he goes on in this next verse, in verse 15, beware of the false prophets. They come to you wearing sheep's clothing, but underneath they are hungry wolves. Yeshua is now applying this opening principle about a narrow gate towards false prophets. Just because someone claims to be a prophet does not mean they really are. And this is important. In a community like ours where we do believe in the gifts of the Spirit, we also know that Yeshua tells us to also be mindful and careful. And it's not just Yeshua. These are the words of the Torah. If you go back into Deuteronomy chapter 13 and chapter 18, it tells us what the guidelines are for someone who claims to be a prophet. In fact, in Deuteronomy chapter 18, verse 20, it says, but if a prophet presumptuously speaks a word in my name, which I didn't order him to say, or if he speaks in the name of other gods, then that prophet must die. You may be wondering, how are we to know if a word has not been spoken by Adonai? When a prophet speaks in the name of Adonai and the prediction does not come true, that is, the word is not fulfilled, then Adonai did not speak that word. The prophet who said it spoke presumptuously. You have nothing to fear from him. That's what the Torah says. We have so many people, even people who claim to be people of faith, put their, their hopes and dreams in, and they say all kinds of nonsense that never comes true, and they're never held accountable for it. Think of all the nonsense of like QAnon and stuff. He never said anything that would ever come true, or they, whoever this stuff is. The point is, there are many people who have TV shows, not pointing anybody out particularly, or write books or have YouTube channels or whatever, and they claim to be prophets. But Yeshua's going to go on to say that you will know a prophet by the fruit that they produce, and also whether or not other people vouch for them. In fact, regarding the accuracy of prophecy, Paul writes in 1 Corinthians chapter 14, verse 29, let 2 or 3 prophets speak while the others weigh what is said. Paul says that if somebody gets up in the congregation and gives a prophecy, the other prophets in the congregation need to weigh what is said in order to determine whether or not it was actually from God. But that's not the experience most of us have had. If somebody gets up and claims to be a prophet, it's like, how dare you question what I just got up to say? Oftentimes it's spiritual manipulation. If I claim to speak for God, who are you to say, like, well? But Paul actually says you have a responsibility. And the others in the congregation need to make sure that we weigh what is said to make sure that it is from God. You judge by the fruit using discernment, which is what Yeshua goes on to explain. And a principle that he uses over and over and over again, he's going to go on in verses 16 through 20. You will recognize them by their fruit. Can people pick grapes from thorn bushes or figs from thistles? Likewise, every healthy tree produces good fruit, but a poor tree produces bad fruit. A healthy tree cannot bear bad fruit, or a poor tree good fruit. Any tree that does not produce good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. So you will recognize them by their fruit. Yeshua over and over again within his parables always talks about judging trees. And this is why he ends up cursing in one situation, the fig tree. Why? Does anybody remember why he curses the fig tree? Because it didn't produce any fruit. And so Yeshua is saying it doesn't matter what it calls itself. If it doesn't produce figs, it's not a fig tree. In the same way, this is a principle for all of us, that if you claim one thing but you have no fruit to show for it, you're not that thing. And remember, this is following what he's saying about prophets. Anybody who claims to be a prophet but has no fruit to show for it is no prophet. This is a very Jewish idea. Talk is cheap, right? Actions speak louder than words. This is why we have this idea that everything is summarized by this idea of love God, love one another, the rest is commentary, right? Or as I shared last week, as Hillel says, what you find hateful, don't do to somebody else, the rest is commentary. Now go and study, right? The principle of judging by fruit then is applied to false leaders and determining who is a true follower of Yeshua. In verse 21, he says, "Not everyone who says to me, 'Lord, Lord,' will enter the kingdom of heaven. Only those who do what my Father in heaven wants. On that day, many will say to me, 'Lord, Lord, didn't we prophesy in your name? Didn't we expel demons in your name? Didn't we perform many miracles in your name?' Then I will tell them to their faces, 'I never knew you. Get away from me, you workers of lawlessness.'" Spiritual deception is a personal responsibility. That we need to do our best in order to judge the fruit. And also there's a responsibility to those who claim, like the false prophets, to be speaking in the name of God, but don't. I've shared before that it's funny that I became a rabbi because I'm very skeptical of organized religion. And the longer I'm a rabbi, the more skeptical I become. Because it seems like anybody can claim to speak for God. Anybody can use the Bible to manipulate it for their own agendas. And very rarely are any of these people held accountable for it. And all we can do is try to do our best. Nobody's perfect, I get that. But we can try to do our best to live by the principles that we claim to believe. To love God, to love one another, to treat one another in a way that we would want to be treated. Now, I realize that's so much harder to actually do, and we all blow it on a regular basis. But we should be making improvements. And every day, we're a little bit better at it than we were the day before. Because if we want to be true followers of Yeshua, this is what he says. "So everyone who hears these words of mine and acts on them will be like a sensible person who builds his house upon bedrock. The rain fell, the rivers flooded, and the winds blew and beat against that house, but it didn't collapse because its foundation was built upon rock. But everyone who hears these words of mine and does not act on them will be like a stupid person who built his house upon sand. The rain fell, the rivers flooded, the winds blew and beat against the house, and it collapsed, and its collapse was horrendous." Those who are true followers of Yeshua are those who are able to use wisdom and discernment to establish the foundations of their faith. Right? Yeshua is saying how you build the foundation of your faith will determine whether or not you are a wise person or a stupid person. Yeshua doesn't hold back here. Right? He's not like, I want you to feel good about yourself, so I'm not, No, Yeshua says, if you actually build a terrible foundation for your faith, you are stupid. That's what he says. You're a stupid person. We need to be able to use wisdom and discernment to establish foundations for our faith. And he concludes his sermon with these words. When Yeshua had finished saying these things, it's the people who said, the crowds were amazed at the way he taught, for he was not instructing them like their Torah teachers, but as one who has authority himself. And then the opening verse of chapter 8, which I think should be, but nobody asked me, should be the closing verse of chapter 7, says, after Yeshua had come down from the hill, large crowds followed him. So the sermon began by he goes up to the top of the mountain and he gives this teaching. He's giving Torah, right? That's the word in Hebrew, yoreh. He begins to teach them. And then it goes on for 3 chapters. This different, and much of it is very halachic, meaning very much Jewish legal discussion. And then he concludes, and it says, then he comes down from the mountain. And not only were many people gathered around, but then many people followed him from there. Throughout these last 3 chapters, Yeshua gave a halachic discourse, a parallel to the giving of the Torah on Mount Sinai. Yeshua, as we discussed before, serves as a second Moses, as a Moses-type figure, but also as the embodiment of Israel as a whole, as one man Israel. And it's fascinating. I was thinking even more of this idea that they taught as one who has authority. What is the common way in rabbinic thought to cite something authoritatively? If a rabbi gets up and wants to speak with authority, what is the formula you usually use? Right. Rabbi Hillel says, right, or Rabbi so-and-so says, you cite somebody else who came before you in order to establish authority. And I was trying to think, is this true even of the Second Temple period? And generally it is. You have heard that our fathers were told, right, that there is a teaching that gets conveyed. Now what's fascinating is Yeshua never uses this formula. So even though he uses all kinds of teachings which were common during the time of the Second Temple period, the one thing he never does is claim his authority based on the authority of someone else. Instead of saying, in the earlier part, in order to give clarification, he'll say, you heard that our fathers were told, but I say, right? Instead of saying, Rabbi so-and-so said, or our sages said this, or, our tradition says this. Instead, he just says, I tell you, I say to you. And this is why later there's another point where they try to stone him, because you speak as though you're God, right? When we began this section on the Sermon on the Mount, we discussed how one of the expectations of Messiah within Jewish tradition is that the Messiah would be the ultimate halachic decisor. That, according to Jewish thought, one of the roles that the Messiah plays is he's supposed to be like Moses, therefore he's to be like a great rabbi, right? But the greatest of all rabbis, meaning he's the one that when there is something that we don't know what to do, when the greatest of our sages don't have a halachic answer, only the Messiah will tell us, and we'll wait. For example, I mentioned recently, I don't remember when, but recently where in the book of Maccabees, when the temple was defiled, according to the books of Maccabees, is that they had to, because there was a pig sacrificed on the altar and many other horrible things done in the temple, what do? Does anybody know or remember? They dismantle the altar and they place the stones somewhere else on the Temple Mount until the prophet will come and tell us what to do with them. Who is the prophet that Maccabees is expecting? The Messiah. Right, the prophet or someone like Moses, basically meaning the Messiah. When the great halachic decisor comes, he'll tell us what to do. And we have many examples of this in Jewish tradition of where only when the Messiah comes, he'll tell us what the true Torah is. There's a great midrash in Midrash Talpiot, which says, the Holy One, blessed be he, will sit and expound the new Torah, which he will give through the Messiah. And then it asks, what does it mean by new Torah? It means the secrets and the mysteries of the Torah that have remained hidden until now. It does not refer to another Torah, heaven forbid. For surely the Torah which he gave us through Moses our teacher, peace be upon him, is the central Torah, but the revelation of her hidden secrets is called the new Torah. And that new Torah will come through the Messiah, according to the Midrash, this particular Midrash. So in conclusion, we need to use the principle of the narrow gate. What does Yeshua mean by that? The idea of using discernment, right? Instead of letting anything just pass through the gate, we need to be discerning of what is able to pass through the gate. And the gate is discernment, using discernment in order to determine what is righteous, who is righteous, the claims of those who claim to be righteous, and how do we use discernment regarding our own spiritual behavior. This is why he warns us against false prophets and false leaders, to judge by the fruit that something produces. And that those who are true followers, Yeshua says, are the ones who will do what I say, that they follow in the ways of the Torah, and not just in deed, but even in their kavanah, and their intention behind it. They're not just going through the motions. Because ultimately, Yeshua speaks as one who has authority because he's the one who gives us the new Torah, right? Not a replacement for, but rather a deeper connection to the Torah. The Torah made flesh who dwells among us, right? Avinu, our Father, as we conclude these words of Yeshua on the mountain, that through the last 3 chapters, the wisdom that he gives us, that we would take seriously and we would really wrestle with how to apply it to ourselves. That this would be a type of musar, a type of ethical teaching for us, of spiritual enlightenment for us. A way to conduct ourselves in ways that we're not just claiming to be trees but have no fruit, but rather that we would be the kind of people that do produce fruit and make a difference. That we apply the principles to preparing the world for the return of our Messiah, to be partners with you in redemption, God. Because so many of us are tired of just going through the motions or watching those go through the motions. Rather, we want to conduct ourselves according to this principle of the narrow gate, of using discernment, of living with fruit, and living our lives in pursuit of the true Torah, the living Torah. So help us to do that, God. Give us the strength through your Ruach. We pray all of this in the name of Yeshua. Amen. So I invite you to rise as we turn in our prayer books to page 78.
Join me in the middle at the image of God. He is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. For by him all things were created, both in heaven and on earth. For it was the Father's good pleasure for all the fullness to dwell in him. Therefore also God highly exalted him and bestowed on him the name which is above every name, that at the name of Yeshua every knee should bow, and of those who are in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and that every tongue should confess that Yeshua the Messiah is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. And when all things are subjected to him, then the Son himself also will be subjected to the one who subjected all things to him, that God may be all in all. Page 79. Aleinu leshabech le'adon hakol, la'tekila li'otzeh bereshit, shelo asanu kagoye haratzot, velo samanu k'mishkapot hadama, shelo sam kalkenu kahem, v'gor aleinu kakol hamonam, v'anachnu korim, u'mishtachavim u'modim, lifnei melech, Malkei Hamlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Shehu Noteh Shamayim v'Yosed Haaretz, Uvmoshav Yekaro v'Shamayim Mimahal, Ushkinatu zo, B'gave Meromim, Hu Eloheinu Eino et malkeinu efesulato, kakatu v'torato, ve'yadat hayom ve'hashivota elevavecha, ki Adonai hu ha'Elohim, bashamayim mimal, ve'al haaretz, mitachat enod. And it is said, the Lord will be king over all the world. On that day, the Lord will be one, and God's name will be one. V'nemar v'chaya Adonai lemelech al kol haaretz bayom hahu yeh Adonai echad u'shemo echad.
So I want to invite those who are in mourning and those observing a yard site to remain standing for the mourner's Kaddish. And we specifically want to mention the yard sites of Harold Goldman, Ray Goldman's father, Murray Frankel, Neil Frankel's father, Claire Goldman, Ray Goldman's mother, and all of you who are remembering somebody this morning. Yitgadal v'yitkadash shemei rabah, v'alma divrach yimtei v'yamlich malchutei, v'yitzmach porkanei v'karem shichei, v'chayachon v'yomechon, v'chayei d'chol beit Yisrael, v'agala u'vizman karev v'imru, amen. Yahei shmei rabah mevorach le'ulam u'lamei olmaya, yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh, v'yitadal v'yitaleh v'yitalal shmei d'kudisha brichu, le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata, tushbechafta v'nechemata, damiran b'alma v'imru, amen. Yahei shlama rabba min shemaya, chayim alenu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru, amen. Oseh shalom b'mo'amav, hu ya'aseh shalom. Alenu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru, amen. May the one who makes peace in the heavenly realms make peace for all of us, for all of Israel and all the nations of the world. And let us say, amen. So you may be seated. Also may God grant peace to the families who mourn and just so many terrible. May God stop all of these random shootings. And in Jerusalem, the synagogue of the 7 people who were killed, may God comfort, the families of those who mourn. Scott, on a little bit of a more positive note.
Shabbat shalom, everyone. So, at the conclusion of service, I know we have a few visitors here. Our custom is that visitors get to go first on the line for Oneg, so please join us for Oneg afterwards for service. And in addition, we also have our usual virtual prayer meetings. Those are on Zoom on Tuesdays at 7 p.m. And if you're able to get here early, we have our Shabbat morning study with Paul August at the Beit Midrash at 9:30 a.m. Also, after the conclusion of Oneg today, we're going to be continuing our Hebrew 101 course. So this is the last class. It's been taking place for many, many weeks. So if you've been taking part in it, congratulations. This is the last class. And again, I'll be after Oneg today. Also, tomorrow, we're going to be having our annual congregational business meeting. That's going to be at 4 p.m., and that will be in person. So again, that'll be tomorrow, 4 p.m. in person here in our congregation. Yeah, and our new members can vote as well. And in addition, we have a lot of new events to also mention. So we have our new monthly series beginning next week. The Women of the Bible, so that's going to be the first Shabbat of each month in person with Monique Broombach, and that's for women only. So if you want to participate, mark your calendars. That starts next week, February 4th, after Oneg. And also, we're really excited to have next week our movie night. We're going to be having the Women's Balcony, and that's going to be at 5 p.m. We're going to be having pizza, so movie and pizza. It's bound to be a great time. So please do join us. Mark your calendars for that. And again, that's going to be next Saturday at 5 p.m. here in our congregation. Also, we're going to be having a new 12-week study, Eat This Book, with Ronald Gittleman, and that's going to be beginning Saturday, February 18th. So that would be a ongoing series. So again, mark your calendars if you're interested, and that'll be Saturday, February 18th. We'll be starting. And if you have any sports fans, and if this is open to friends and families, we're going to be having our Bridgeport Islanders game. That's going to be taking place on Saturday, March 18th at 7 p.m. We actually have the opportunity to actually hold the American flag before the game starts, so it's really going to be a great time. So please RSVP. There's been emails that have been going out with the link to get more information. Also check out our website. We also have that link posted there as well. We would like to have the RSVP around the first week of March. So again, this is open to friends, families. Please do welcome others to attend. It's bound to be a great time. Yeah. And that's it.
The movie is called The Women's Balcony. It's a really great movie that won a lot of awards. It's an Israeli movie. So it's called The Women's Balcony. It has to do with, in how Orthodox synagogues, men and women pray separately. And in older synagogues, women were usually up in a balcony. So if you go to any of the older synagogues around here, there's one downtown here in New Haven. There's others where the women's balcony was where it was. And so it's the name of the movie, and you have to understand what happens. It collapses. I'm not going to tell you anything more than that. But that's the drama. Bum, bum. What happens when the women's balcony in the synagogue collapses? Well, you're about to find out. It's actually a wonderful movie. We've shown this in synagogues that we were a part of before, and it's a wonderful discussion on what makes community. Is it a building? Is it the rabbi? Is it the people? Right? What is community? It's a really wonderful movie. It's a great movie, and so afterwards we'll have a discussion and what? And it's funny. It has some serious moments, but it's also very funny. Anything else you want to say about it? Or I should say about it? Okay. So anyway, that's the name of the movie. It's going to be a great movie. It's an Israeli movie. So let's close our service. So if you will rise for our closing benediction. Dropping batteries left and right. Rabbi Tony, do you want to do the blessing for us today? All right. Yevarechecha Adonai v'yishmerecha. Ya'er Adonai panav elecha v'chunecha. Yisa Adonai panav elecha v'yasem lecha shalom. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. May the Lord lift up his countenance upon you and fill you with peace. Amen. All right, well, Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Join us right now over in the Oneg area so we can make Kiddush and Hamotzi. All right, Shabbat Shalom.